Welcome to today's Explainer. Okay, we are diving into something today that is literally right in front of our faces all day long, yet it's totally invisible. We're talking about the air we breathe. We're going to take this fascinating journey together, starting way out with the massive global atmosphere and then zooming all the way down into the very living room you might be sitting in right now. We'll be looking at the data, the architecture, and even the human habits that ultimately define our air quality. So let's get right into it.
Right off the bat, take a look at this number, 1.7 million. According to a massive State of Global Air report, in just one single year, 2019, there were 1.7 million deaths linked to fine particulate matter, which is known as PM2.5, across over 7,000 cities worldwide. It is a really heavy statistic, I know, but it is the stark reality of urban pollution.
Here's our roadmap for today. First, the global air crisis. Second, we'll look at PM2.5 versus NO2. Third, we go inside a Milan student house. Fourth, we'll ask, does building height actually matter? And finally, we'll look at the human impact indoors.
Section 1. The global air crisis. To really wrap our heads around this, we have to look at the sheer scale of the State of Global Air report. The stakes of urban pollution have truly never been clearer.
The volume of data we're dealing with here is absolutely staggering. The Health Effects Institute analyzed the air quality for exactly 7,239 cities. We've got those 1.7 million deaths linked to PM2.5 that we just mentioned. But look at that bottom number. 2.6 billion people exposed to excessive nitrogen dioxide, or NO2. When you put these multi-million and billion figures right next to each other, you really start to grasp just how monumental this problem is on a global scale.
Moving on to Section 2. PM2.5 versus NO2. These are the two major pollutants tracking our cities, but we need to pivot for a second to understand the crucial differences between how they operate.
There is a really stark geographic divide here. PM2.5 pollution hotspots, so fine particles from dust and combustion, tend to grab all the press, and they are generally higher in low- and middle-income countries. But NO2, nitrogen dioxide, is a universal problem. The report found that a whopping 86% of the cities analyzed exceeded the World Health Organization's guidelines for NO2. So whether you live in a high-income, middle-income, or low-income country, NO2 from vehicle exhaust and fossil fuels is right there in the air you're breathing.
Which brings us to a huge, pivotal question. We hear all these terrifying global statistics, but how much of this pollution actually crosses the threshold and gets inside your specific apartment?
That brings us to Section 3, inside a Milan student house. To answer that question, we're going to zoom way in on a highly specific, totally fascinating 2024 architectural study focused entirely on a single student dormitory over in Milan, Italy. Just picture the space for a second. These are the exact, intimate areas being studied. You've got a shared living room and kitchen area on one side, and a typical single bedroom on the other. We're talking about spaces that are roughly 20 square meters. The researchers wanted to build a really stark contrast with that macro global data we just looked at and figure out what is happening in the exact micro environment where people are actually living, sleeping, and studying. And their setup was super clever. The researchers deployed around 30 low-cost sensors to track temperature, humidity, CO2, and particulate matter, but they didn't just dump them in one room. They strategically placed them inside and outside across the 2nd, 3rd, 7th, and 11th floors. They wanted to see exactly how the outside air sneaks indoors depending on how high up you live in the building.
They also split the study into two very distinct 2-week monitoring periods to capture the changing seasons. Period 1 was in June 2024, which brought warmer temperatures and, really interestingly, a massive dust intrusion event. Period 2 was in October 2024, which meant central heating, intermittent rain, and high humidity. It's so vital to see how dramatically the weather completely changes the testing environment.
And speaking of weather changes, nature definitely threw them a curveball. Look at this map from the European Union's Copernicus system showing a Sahara and dust forecast from June 2024 rolling right over Europe. Distant weather events have incredibly local impacts. During that first period, the researchers literally found red dust caked onto the exterior surfaces of their monitoring devices in Milan. Talk about a global event landing right on your windowsill. Okay, Section 4. Does building height matter? With all those sensors in place and the weather doing its thing, let's answer the ultimate apartment hunting question. Does living on a higher floor actually protect your lungs from street-level smog?
The results here were incredibly striking. The study analyzed what's called the indoor to outdoor, or IO ratio.
Lower floors definitely had higher outdoor PM 2.5 concentrations right outside their windows and greater infiltration creeping inside. But as you go up, the upper floors generally had lower PM 2.5 infiltration. In fact, top floor rooms often had an IO ratio below 1, meaning the air inside was actually cleaner than the air immediately outside. So yes, lower floors are definitely more vulnerable to the street.
But wait, here's the crazy plot twist. When the weather cleared up and outdoor PM fell below 20 micrograms per cubic meter, the outside air wasn't the primary threat anymore. Suddenly, indoor sources became dominant. Because these students were cooking in shared kitchens, the pollution they were generating indoors actually became their biggest problem. And this was especially true on the lower floors where the airflow is a bit different. The researchers summed up this whole dynamic perfectly with this quote: "While outdoor air quality affects indoor air quality, occupant behavior, especially window opening and ventilation management, remains crucial in minimizing indoor pollutants." Basically, your human habits are your absolute best defense against both structural and environmental pollution. You're in the driver's seat.
Which brings us to Section 5, the human impact indoors. Let's shift to the human element here. Because all this data is great, but how did these students actually feel living through this experiment? Human perception tells the real story. The researchers sent out surveys, and the real-world responses were super relatable. Students complained about feeling like they were overheating in those small single bedrooms. More importantly, during that rainy October period, things like rain and even bugs forced people to just keep their windows slammed shut. They also voiced major frustration with cooking odors from the shared kitchens creeping into their sleeping spaces.
And this had real physical consequences. Because the students kept their windows closed due to the rain and bugs in October, the sensors detected massive spikes in indoor CO2. And the result? The survey showed a huge jump in reported flu-like symptoms. In period 1, reports were low, but in period 2, 8 out of the 9 respondents using the shared kitchens reported symptoms like coughing and sneezing. Lower ventilation literally directly correlated with a worse health experience.
So, what is the takeaway for you and me? How do we tie this tiny micro-study back to the macro world? Well, here are 3 clear, actionable steps you can use in your own home. Number 1. Ventilate at night when the outdoor air is generally cleaner and cooler, based on your own comfort. Number 2, check your local air quality index and avoid opening windows during high outdoor PM periods, like a smoggy afternoon. And number 3, actively manage your ventilation when cooking. Turn on that exhaust hood because you are generating a lot of particulate matter right there in your kitchen.
So, take a deep breath. Does the air in your bedroom right now reflect the massive global crisis outside? Or does it reflect your own ventilation habits inside? It's a really powerful reminder that while we are all facing this global challenge, we have an incredible amount of control over the micro-environment where we spend most of our lives. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and I hope this helps you breathe just a little bit easier.